overall numbers of deaths, overall numbers of COVID-19. Another bit of info for you to know, the hospitals may test the same person more than once for COVID-19 while they're in the hospital, sometimes up to 3 times or more. If those tests come back positive every time, they're counted as individual cases. So let's say you had 3 positive tests, that looks like 3 different individuals had COVID-19 when there's only 1. Also, really important to know, the antibody tests given can cross-react with the common cold and flu viruses. Folks, we are counting the common cold and flu viruses as COVID-19 cases. How many? I don't think there's been investigation into this. The PCR tests that they use are around 80% specificity. It sounds like that's pretty accurate, but it really isn't. So again, there's cross-reactivity with that test as well. A very important fact to know is that COVID-19 has never been isolated as an organism and proven to be an infectious agent per our protocol called Koch's postulates. I will list a link and a graph to show you a little bit more of what that is. It's a process where if we think something's infectious, it has to be isolated out of the infected organism. It has to be in its entirety, grown in a petri dish or some other medium. Once it's multiplied, take it back out, inoculate it or inject it back into a healthy organism. There has to be signs and symptoms of infection in that healthy organism. Then we have to extract the same organism out to prove that it infected that healthy organism, and then identify it as the true infection. Koch's postulates has failed the COVID-19. It's never been isolated. The Health Canada has actually printed a letter stating that there is no isolation of the COVID-19 virus. Well, maybe this could be why our testing methodology seems to be worthless. Personally, I don't trust any of it, looking at the data more and more and more as a physician and just as a person. I think we need to
one. Drop. Drop. Ah!
Have proof that COVID-19 exists. I think we need an investigation into this. I think we need an investigation into the data in general. I believe the evidence is overwhelming that we are not being told the truth. The data information is bad. And we are making monumental, life-changing decisions for ourselves, our family, and our world based on false and misleading data.
Another example of science-inspired gullibility, according to Lewis, was what he called evolutionism. the popular idea that matter could magically transform itself into complex and conscious living things through a blind and unguided process. Lewis's doubts about unguided evolution went back to his days as a soldier in World War I. While recovering from shrapnel wounds, a young Lewis read the book Creative Evolution by French natural philosopher Henri Bergson. Bergson questioned the ability of Darwin's theory to account for complex structures like the human eye through a blind process like natural selection. Lewis believed that evolutionism, like Freudianism, contained a fatal self-contradiction regarding the human mind. According to the Darwinian view, reason was simply the unforeseen and unintended byproduct of a mindless process, based on survival of the fittest. Lewis pointed out the key difficulty with the Darwinian account of reason. If my own mind is a product of the irrational, he asked, how shall I trust my mind when it tells me about evolution? In his personal copy of Charles Darwin's autobiography, Lewis underlined passages where Darwin had asked himself the same question.
But then with me the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind?
What this means is that if natural selection and random genetic mutations gave rise to our intellectual capacities, we should assume that our intellectual capacities are consistent with survival-enhancing behavior, but we should have no especially good reason to believe that we actually know truth, or that our intellectual faculties even have that capacity of connecting with truth as one of its natural outcomes, because that's not what it was designed for. If anything, our reason is just sort of along for the ride with our survival-enhancing behaviors, which natural selection over millions of years has selected. So the implication of Lewis's argument here is that if naturalism is true and the Darwinian mechanism more or less accounts for our faculties, we probably shouldn't trust our reason.
The idea that a blind and purposeless process without a mind can produce things like human beings that have minds, and produce moral beliefs and things that sometimes go against our need for physical survival. The idea that a mindless process of survival of the fittest could create such things really was an outlandish one, according to Lewis. How could a mindless process produce minds? And to think that it could really just shows how gullible people can be in the name of science.
3, 2, 1, 0.
The third similarity between science and magic, according to Lewis, is the quest for power.
Magic was about the quest for power. Magicians wanted to have power over the world and over the universe. They wanted to harness the powers of nature and the deeper powers of nature in order to control it. And Lewis said that much of modern science, not all, but much of modern science was actually devoted towards power over the world.
For many people in the 20th century, the power of modern science was its greatest virtue. They hoped science would usher in a new age of peace and prosperity, a scientific utopia.
All curves and plastic. Monsanto's House of the Future is open to the public at Disneyland. The 4-wing plastic shell makes a snug and solid 5-room dwelling designed for a family of 4. And coincidentally, it's a fairly typical family of 4 that gets for...
to actually collect and analyze safety and efficacy data, nor do the manufacturers, are they obligated to update vaccine formulas in light of new scientific advances. Pretty unbelievable. But that's not all. On top of that one, vaccine manufacturers have received additional immunity from suit and liability to all claims of loss for those who manufacture, distribute, administer, prescribe, or use vaccines. Do you understand? We have zero recourse for any harm that is done to us. What they're trying to say is that we don't have a choice. They will force a vaccine on us that has no proof that it will work. It's experimental. And then we have no recourse. Rush guys. They admittedly are cutting corners and skipping normal methods, these are their words, to validate safety because it is in the best interest of the public. What? Are you... I can't believe you're just outright saying this. First of all, it's only coming back from the manufacturers themselves. Do you trust them to tell you the truth? They're
and storage unit. A look at the future. Looks good, eh?
For the scientific utopians of Lewis's era, science was the savior that would allow us to remake our world.
What gets under your skin about research is the attitude of the men in the labs. They work on the principle that nothing is impossible.
You hear that, Bud?
Well, sure, but I don't believe it. Open your eyes, Bud. The proof's all around you.
And of course, that can be good. Modern science brings us good things. Many things from the microwave oven to the computers to life-saving treatments of modern medicine, which Lewis certainly appreciated. But on the other hand, that tendency to want to control things can bring us the Orwellian state of George Orwell's 1984. And so Lewis thought that modern science, in fact, was far more dangerous than magic because magic failed. Magic doesn't work at the end of the day. And so it wasn't so dangerous because people actually couldn't use it to control the world. Modern science has the potential that you really can control people. If you find the right drugs or find the right treatments, you can manipulate them. And so if you don't have some other way of protecting and limiting what you do in the name of science, some ethical basis that isn't dictated by science itself that can control it, then you are facing a really bleak future.
Lewis's critique of scientific utopianism was at the heart of his novel That Hideous Strength, which tells the story of a conspiracy to transform England into a scientific dictatorship. The conspiracy is led by a government bureaucracy with the deceptively innocuous name of the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, or NICE.
I think that hideous strength and Huxley's Brave New World are the two greatest dystopias in our language in the 20th century.
The agenda of NICE in That Hideous Strength reads like a wish list drawn up by the era's leading scientific social reformers. It included sterilization of the unfit, selective breeding, biochemical conditioning, experimentation on both animals and criminals, and above all, truly of NICE in That Hideous Strength reads like a wish list drawn up by the era's leading scientific social reformers. It included sterilization of the unfit,
A really bleak future.
Lewis's critique of scientific utopianism was at the heart of his novel That Hideous Strength, which tells the story of a conspiracy to transform England into a scientific dictatorship. The conspiracy is led by a government bureaucracy with the deceptively innocuous name of the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, or NICE.
I think that hideous strength and Huxley's Brave New World are the two greatest dystopias in our language in the 20th century.
The agenda of NICE in That Hideous Strength reads like a wish list drawn up by the era's leading scientific social reformers. It included sterilization of the unfit, selective breeding, biochemical conditioning, experimentation on both animals and criminals, and above all, truly scientific planning.
A scientific planning that is pretending to
biochemical conditioning, experimentation on both animals and criminals, and above all, truly scientific planning.
A scientific planning that is pretending to provide a new humanity that is doing away with traditional ethics, that is doing away with all traditional restraints.
Lewis depicts a world in that hideous strength in which nothing is sacred. Daniel Bell has told us that the essence of modernity is that nothing is sacred. In The Abolition of Man, and also in that hideous strength, we see the consequences of a world in which nothing is sacred, which includes the human person. The human person is not sacred, and when that happens, there are no distinctions between individuals, or humans and animals, or humans and vegetables, or humans and minerals, and we have the kind of thing we've had in the 20th century.
In the 2 decades before his death, Lewis became increasingly alarmed by the rise of scientific authoritarianism.
Lewis was very concerned by the dogmatic use of science, and that is why he wrote his novel, That Hideous Strength. That is why he wrote his book, The Abolition of Man, where he actually worries and somewhat sort of predicts the rise of a new class of people, of experts speaking in the name of science, who would dictate to everyone else. In fact, by the end of his life, Lewis was worrying about the rise of what he called scientocracy, government and society that claims to be based on the claims of modern science, but in reality really is based on a scientific clique of a few people who are speaking in the name of science. And maybe they are adopting the majority view of science, but they're claiming the right to rule based on their scientific knowledge and expertise.
Lewis's concern about authoritarian science seems eerily prophetic.
In the pursuit of criminals, one learns their devices. What is this mambo jumbo? The handshake and the ring, Watson, are archaic rituals preserved by the 33rd degree members of the secret order of Freemasons.
directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world, using a satellite phone and a laptop directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the budget analyst office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts. And those who harbored them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site. We can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WPC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one's meant to follow.
Well, about 3 weeks ago, I found this sort of ironic. Documents that were taken.
That's a nice shirt. It's a Ben Sherman.
That shirt is something else. That shirt is something else. It's that shirt. It's that shirt.
You wanted to know who I am, Zero Cool?
My favorite too.
Well, let me explain the new world order. Governments and corporations need people like you and me. We are the keyboard and all those other people out there who have no idea what's going on are the cat. They need. I need my help. Let me help you.
In a world driven by science and technology, those who question the new order, like C.S. Lewis did, increasingly find themselves labelled anti-science. C.S. Lewis would have rejected the charge.
Lewis did not accept the idea that science was a special form of knowledge that was somehow immune to inspection, that was somehow cordoned off from the non-specialist assessing the deliverances of the sciences. Lewis was well aware that, first of all, that there's no such thing as science as such. There are sciences, and each science has its particular methods and its particular areas of study. And also that the sciences, to be good, need to interact with one another, but they do so by means of the larger tools of good, rational, critical thinking, and so that the things that the scientists say are subject to review by everyone who is able to think well, to think critically, to think rationally.
Lewis did not deny that scientific expertise might be necessary for good public policy in many areas, but he insisted that science alone was not sufficient.
Knowing, say, how things work, knowing how cells work, or knowing how ecosystems work, doesn't tell you what you ought to do for your society. Because public policy is not just about the technical expertise of how things work. It's about what good is worth having at what price. And as C.S. Lewis pointed out, on these questions, a scientific training gives you no added value. Scientists are not moral philosophers, yet political and social judgments involve not just how do things work and how can we make them work better, but how should we act, and what's worth spending money on, and what's worth doing, and what freedoms are worth giving up or not. And on these sorts of moral and ethical questions, someone's science training doesn't give them the right to dictate to the rest of society.
Sun, cut off its leaves, medicate or vaccinate that plant. But an epigenetic approach, a wellness approach, is to give that plant water, and it can be well. You see, your body is no different. We must eat well, move well, think well, and we can be well. In other words, your level of health is the genetic expression of...
science was a good thing, but he also thought that it held some really strong dangers. The biggest danger really was the penchant to control. In a scientific view, if you think that is the only way that we have knowledge of the world, and so if you think that if I have the scientific truth about something, that's, end of story, I know everything, that really tends to feed a power trip. Whether you're a scientist or you're a politician who's trying to latch on to the prestige of science, you really have people who are going to abuse their power because they think, look, we're the only ones who know what should happen because we know how the universe really works. Therefore, we should be able to dictate what our cultural beliefs are. We should dictate what our government should do, how we should design governmental programs. We should dictate all manner of public policy, and that anyone who doesn't have a scientific training or isn't part of the consensus view of science is basically stupid or against progress or against science, and so should be really swept by the wayside and shouldn't be listened to. And I think Lewis thought that that almost totalitarian impulse was really a dangerous thing. Lewis, I think, was properly so frightened by that potential within science. And that's why he stressed why we really need a way to understand the limits of science, and that there is something behind science, a large be really swept by the wayside and shouldn't be listened to. And I think Lewis thought that that almost totalitarian impulse was really a dangerous thing. Lewis, I think, was properly so frightened by that potential within science. And that's why he stressed why we really need a way to understand the limits of science, and that there is something behind science, a larger transcendent ethical sphere behind science, and that we aren't just blind matter in motion, that we're part of a designed universe that actually sets limits on what we should and shouldn't do.
It's an age-old problem. How do we prevent something good from being twisted for evil ends? C.S. Lewis hoped that scientists themselves would find a way to rescue science from scientism, creating a regenerate science that respected human rights and honored human dignity, a science that would no longer be the magician's twin.
Part of the physical structure of the brain. Therefore, whatever appears on the television screen emerges as raw experience for those who watch it.
I am making very heavy weather of what most believers find a very simple matter. What is more natural and easier if you believe in God than to address him? How could one not? Yes, but it depends who one is. For those in my position, adult converts from the intelligentsia, that simplicity and spontaneity can't always be the starting point. One can't just jump back into one's childhood. If one tries to, the result will only be an archaizing revival, like Victorian Gothic, a parody of being born again. We have to work. Back to the simplicity a long way round. In actual practice, in my prayers, I often have to use that long way at the very beginning of the prayer. Saint François de Sales begins every meditation with the command, Mettez-vous en la présence de Dieu. I wonder how many different mental operations have been carried out in intended obedience to that. What happens to me if I try to take it, as Betty would tell me, simply, is the juxtaposition of two representations, or ideas, or phantoms. One is the bright blur in the mind which stands for God. The other is the idea I call me. But I can't leave it at that, because I know, and it's useless to pretend I don't know, that they are both phantasms. The real I has created them both, or rather, built them up in the vaguest way from all sorts of psychological odds and ends. Very often, paradoxically, the first step is to banish the bright blur, or in statelier language, to break the idol. Let's get back to what has at least some degree of resistant reality. Here are the four walls of the room, and here am I. But those terms are merely the facade of impenetrable mystery. The walls, they say, are matter. That is, as the physicists will try to tell me, something totally unimaginable, only mathematically describable, existing in a curved space charged with appalling energy. If I could penetrate far enough into that mystery, I should perhaps finally reach what is sheerly real. And what am I? The facade is what I call consciousness. I am at least conscious of the color of those walls. I am not, in the same way or to the same degree, conscious of what I call my thought. For if I try to examine what happens when I am thinking, it stops happening. Yet even if I could examine my thinking, it would, I well know, turn out to be the thinnest possible film on the surface of a vast deep. The psychologists have taught us that. Their real error lies in underestimating the depth and the variety of its contents.
One of my
Dazzling
bosses had
lightnings
a
as well as
stroke.
dark clouds coming. And if all the enchanting
He wore
visions
two
are,
masks.
as they rashly claim, mere disguises for sex, where lives the hidden artist who, from such monotonous and claustrophobic material, can make works of such various and liberating art? And depths of time, too. All my past, my ancestral past, perhaps my pre-human past. Here again, if I could dive deeply enough, I might again reach at the bottom that which simply is. And only now am I ready, in my own fashion, to place myself in the presence of God. Either mystery, if I could follow it far enough, would lead me to the same point. The point where something, in each case unimaginable, leaps forth from God's naked hand. The Indian, looking at the material world, says, I am that. I say, that and I grow from one root. Verbum superne prodiem. The word coming forth from the Father has made both and brought them together in this subject-object embrace. And what, you ask, is the advantage of all this? Well, for me, I'm not talking about anyone else, it plants the prayer right in the present reality. For, whatever else is or is not real, this momentary confrontation of subject and object is certainly occurring. Always occurring, except when I am asleep. Here is the actual meeting of God's activity and man's, not some imaginary meeting that might occur if I were an angel, or if God incarnate entered the room. There is here no question of a God up there or out there, rather the present operation of God in here as the ground of my own being, and God in there as the ground of the matter that surrounds me, and God embracing and uniting both in the daily miracle of finite consciousness. The two facades, the I as I perceive myself, and the room as I perceive it, were obstacles as long as I mistook them for ultimate reality. But the moment I recognized them as facades, as mere surfaces, they became conductors. You see, a lie is a delusion only so long as we believe it. But a recognized lie is a reality, a real lie, and as such may be highly instructive. A dream ceases to be a delusion as soon as we wake, but it does not become a non-entity. It is a real dream, and it also may be instructive. A stage set is not a real wood or drawing room. It is a real stage set, and maybe a good one. In fact, we should never ask of anything, is it real? For everything is real. The proper question is, a real what? For example, a real snake or real delirium tremens. The objects around me and my idea of me will deceive if taken at their face value, but they are momentous if taken as the end product of divine activity. Thus, and not otherwise, the creation of matter and the creation of mind meet one another, and the circuit is closed. Or put it this way, I have called my material surroundings a stage set. A stage set is not a dream nor a non-entity. But if you attack a stage house with a chisel, you will not get chips of brick or stone. You'll only get a hole in a piece of canvas, and, beyond that, windy darkness. Similarly, if you start investigating the nature of matter, you will not find anything like what imagination has always supposed matter to be. You will get mathematics. From that unimaginable physical reality, my senses select a few stimuli. These they translate or symbolize into sensations, which have no likeness at all to the reality of matter. Of these sensations, my associative power, very much directed by my practical needs and influenced by social training, makes up little bundles into what I call things, labeled by nouns. Out of these I build myself a neat little box stage, suitably provided with property such as hills, fields, houses, and the rest. In this I can act. And you may well say, act, for what I call myself, for all practical everyday purposes, is also a dramatic construction. Memories, glimpses in the shaving glass, and snatches of the very fallible activity called introspection are the principal ingredients. Normally I call this construction me, and the stage set the real world. Now the moment of prayer is for me, or involves for me as its condition, the awareness, the reawakened awareness that this real world and real self are very far from being rock-bottom reality. I cannot, in the flesh, leave the stage, either to go behind the scenes or to take my seat in the pit. But I can remember that these regions exist. And I also remember that my apparent self, this clown or hero or super, under his grease paint is a real person with an offstage life. The dramatic person could not tread the stage unless he concealed the real person. Unless the real and unknown I existed, I would not even make mistakes about the imagined me. And in prayer, this real I struggles to speak, for once, from his real being, and to address, for once, not the other actors, but, what shall I call him? The author, for he invented us all? The producer, for he controls all? Or the audience, for he watches and will judge the performance? The attempt is not to escape from space and time, and from my creaturely situation as a subject facing objects. It is more modest, to reawake the awareness of that situation. If that can be done, there is no need to go anywhere else. This situation itself is, at every moment, a possible theophany. Here is the holy ground. The bush is burning now. Of course, this attempt... We got 112.